I'm Owen Casey Stevens, and this is the story of how I got into a mass melee in fencing class. This story takes place something like 30 years ago, maybe a little more, honestly, when I was in high school. And during this time, my friends and I would get involved in sort of unscripted, no rules, boffa weapon fights out in the woods around my hometown and across bridges and such, and sometimes in backyards. And we largely made our weapons with PVC and bamboo cores. I had a huge amount of bamboo in my backyard. And we would put foam on them, and then we would wrap that open cell foam as tightly as possible with duct tape, creating what were honestly giant saps or bludgeons. But luckily, we were more rubbery than we were strong or vicious. So pretty much while we'd had a lot of bruises, and I'll be honest, a few broken bones, and I cracked my wrist once doing that, we didn't have any serious injuries, and when you were hit, you knew you were hit, and that would cause a limb to stop functioning, or you'd be dead, or whatever. Like I said, there weren't a lot of rules involved. And during this time, it is worth noting that a good friend of mine was the only person that had managed to get a piece of bamboo and PVC, and for that matter, duct tape, to be sturdy enough to make himself a two-handed greatsword or longsword, because every time one of us tried it, it was significantly too floppy to be used. And I was the only person who managed to make a shield, or at least a decent-sized shield. It was a good 3 feet diameter octagon. And frequently, our battles would end up being he on one side and I on the other, because his giant sword and my shield were considered to be too effective to put us ever on the same side. So during one of the summers, in between school years, my mother decided that it was probably a good idea if we had some idea what we were doing, especially since as we got older, we were getting stronger and we were not necessarily getting any rubberier. So she convinced us to take a fencing class over the summer. This was offered by the University of Oklahoma. Anyone could sign up. I wish I could remember the name of our fencing instructor, but as I say, it was 30 or so years ago. And she was a woman who was maybe 5'2", lean, endless endurance, very, very patient, a really good teacher. And so we went and we started to learn the proper crouch and getting in the right position and moving in the lane and right of way. And this was very unlike everything we had done before, but it was fascinating. And I learned that I had leg muscles that I had never, ever used before. And in passing, after several classes, one of us, I don't remember if it was my friend or I, mentioned this was very, very different from our melees with foam-covered PVC and bamboo weapons. And the teacher was immediately fascinated that we did this, and she asked if we could bring some of those weapons with us to the next class. And we thought, sure, why not? Now, she may have been thinking in terms of, hey, we'll bring 2 or 3, but since we frequently had melees with 15 or 20 of our friends that would range all over a huge section of park, we had a couple of big military-style, open-topped duffel bags that we would just stuff our entire arsenal in. So we brought a whole arsenal of weapons. And she took a look at them, and she bapped herself on the arm a few times, and she was like, well, how do you all do this? So for that one class, instead of fencing, we explained the rough rules: 1 shot to a limb and the limb doesn't work. Don't hit each other in the head. She did require us to wear our fencing helmets, which was probably a good call. Shot to the body and you're dead. And we broke a team of, 12, 15 people in the class into 2 teams, maybe 3 teams, and we just went at it for the whole class. Now, this was very unlike any of the fighting that our fencing instructor had done, and she picked pretty much the shortest, lightest of the short sword-like weapons we had. That said, I don't think anyone ever managed to hit her with anything, and she was perfectly capable of doing a drop lunge and stabbing someone somewhere in the midsection and taking them out of the fight. So while my friend and I did pretty well because we were experienced, in the end it was unsurprisingly our fencing instructor who was the only woman left standing. She thanked us for the experience, suggested to us that maybe we ought to be wearing pads or maybe have some more firm rules than, hey, don't break someone's nose. And then we went back to fencing for the rest of the classes. So it was an interesting experience. And it's one of the things that I learned from it is that I probably had not picked up any particular skill at fencing, but someone who's really skilled at fencing can apply a lot of the skills to other forms of combat. So it's always been an interesting experience to me and one I thought I'd share.